hours will be like changed a little bit. So I don't know if I can call you in the regular time I used to call you. So I will do my best to keep the calls, but for a week it will be a bit of a shaky ground, and I cannot guarantee I will have like the perfect schedule. But I will, of course, continue my sitting.
Okay, well, I'll look forward to your next call, even if it's a week away.
Okay.
Meanwhile, you you have touched on a subject about um, depression and anxiety. The
Mhm.
modern research is showing that depression and anxiety are closely related. They're deeply related, and that possibly the way of looking at depression is not from the depression of the way that the person feels inside, but the depression has more to do with observable behavior.
Mhm.
All right. So when you put that in context with anxiety, if our life is filled with anxiety, then anything we do will bring on more anxiety, and therefore, to stop anxiety, we tend to go into a depression. So, depression is kind of the cure for anxiety,
Mhm.
but it's only a symptom, it's not an actual issue.
I see.
Um, the next thing that we need to look at is that the normal functioning of the human brain has a lot to do with the DNA and our past existence, so that what would have been a major advantage 100,000 years ago winds up in our new society being a disadvantage, but it's still
Mhm.
the normal functioning of the brain.
Yes.
Now, the normal function of the brain can be changed in two ways. One is through training, and the other one is through chemical changes. And that
Mhm.
people have been looking for chemical changes or chemical things as a solution to problems that would be better solved with training.
Mhm.
Okay? An example of that would actually be in any particular sport, that training in the sport is the absolute necessary thing. That when guys put on steroids to do their sport better, they're only adding a little bit on the top. But the entire point is that the guy's already very good at sport. So most of what was going on was training. You can't take your average Joe Blow or any kid in high school and give him steroids and expect him to be the captain of the football team.
Yeah.
That just doesn't happen like that. Okay. And so we have to be careful in the understanding of when and why and the various uses of medication. This actually means that it's worthwhile for everyone, especially those who are practicing Anapanasati, to pay very, very close attention. In other words, investigate
Mhm.
what effects these pills have on you.
Mhm.
Because the better you understand the pill, and I think, in fact, what you're saying is that you were kind of doing that, and
Yeah.
you were kind of figuring out that that pill wasn't doing you as much good as, let us say, the intention of it when you started taking them 3 years ago. That
Yeah.
things are, in fact, changing now.
Yeah. It was kind of I have like the necessity for it if I didn't have like proper training. But since I am now engaging in like checking out this stuff and I'm more stable, I can actually check if it's still a good trade because it tempers and numbs some
Hmm.
very needed feelings. So I have like to decide if I want to like keep numbering it, and I don't anymore.
Okay. When I first started learning about Buddhism, I've
Mm,
been to many teachers and read a lot of books and all of that kind of stuff. And that I have, over the years, found that some of the most important key ingredients of Buddhism kind of get sloughed over or not really paid attention to, uh, mainly because of the frequency of occurrence in the sutras or whatnot like that. But I was quite interested in this quality that the word investigation is used as an enlightenment factor, and the reason is for why. Why would in unremitting investigation become an enlightenment factor? And so, using that as research, I came to understand that one's right view, the first item on the Eightfold Noble Path, the right view is let's look at what's going on. That's the right view. Let's actually do an investigation. One of the qualities also in an investigation is that it's not a viewpoint. It's not a point of view. When we
mm-hmm,
think of right view, because of the way that we have been trained, we think of right view as a viewpoint. But in fact, any good movie has many different camera angles,
mm-hmm,
right? And that a very, very low quality movie would only have one camera angle,
mm-hmm.
like what we're doing here. I mean, we just got one camera and that's it.
Yeah.
But with a good high quality movie that's had a lot of time and effort put into it, one of the qualities of it is that the camera will give us a lot of different points of view.
Mm-hmm.
This is actually part of the practice for the Eightfold Noble Path, is to understand that we need to really investigate things, and we need to investigate them from more than one point of view. That we need to see it from many, many different points of view. An example of that would be when a doctor is giving you a medication. Before you take that medication, it's important to investigate the doctor's point of view as to why he's giving you this medication. But unfortunately, those times are gone now. That the time to ask him about that was when he was prescribing the medication. But
Mm-hmm.
now we can still come back and start looking at that and investigating for that. Now, one of the things that I'll tell you now is that I'm not in a position of telling anyone to stop taking any medications
Yeah, of
or to
course.
start taking any medications at all.
Mm-hmm.
That will be completely between you and your doctor. But the one who needs the best education, the one who needs to do the deep investigation, is the client or the patient. They need to really look at what's going on. To don't take a medication without knowing what it's doing, and that means both reading it in the book of what it's supposed to do, and then checking that out on yourself to see if that
Mm-hmm.
medication is in fact doing its job. And
Mm-hmm.
so now that you're practicing Anapanasati, a few things are beginning to change. One of the reasons that people get into a state of depression, as we had talked a bit earlier, is because that's the reaction to anxiety. When we generally, but it's depression can be the reaction to a lot of different things, but anxiety seems to be the favorite one. And so, by doing the investigation, we begin to see, wait a minute, the problem is not that I'm depressed, that that's merely a symptom. of this other thing that's going on underneath, this anxiety. And that anxiety is actually, uh, it can be understood to be restlessness.
Mm-hmm.
And that restlessness can come either in two ways. One is the restlessness that comes up in the mind in the form of a restless mind that jumps from object to object to object.
Yeah.
And that this is normally known as monkey mind.
Yes.
But anxiety also manifests itself in bodily experiences
Yeah.
also, that there are actual feelings in the body that we need to become in touch with, to learn,
Yes.
to
Yeah.
note. And so this is part of the quality of why, within the context of the practice of Buddhist meditation, let's just call it, or Anapanasati, many of the teaching methods don't deal very strongly with the qualities of the hindrances. And yet again, the sutras are very, very explicit about that we have to remove the hindrances in order to get into the states that we want to be in, because the whole definition of the word hindrance is that it's hindering us, like anxiety, for instance, is a hindrance. And restlessness is a hindrance to being satisfied and happy. So, part of the investigation that needs to be done is the investigation to decide what is it that's worthy of being in the mind and what's worthy or wholesome that we can keep, or what is it that is unwholesome and unworthy of being in the mind. And so this again is part of the investigation that needs to be done. So this investigation is actually part of the Eightfold Noble Path with sati and with right view. The right view is let's view this thing. Let's take a look at what's going on. This is that point that, in fact, the Buddha made so famous when, with that famous statement, "Aha, I see you, Mara."
Mm.
That "Aha, I see you, Mara," "Aha, I see you," anxiety is based upon two things. One was the sati, to wake up, to take a look, and two, the actual looking or the investigation.
Mm-hmm.
And so, um, in the beginning, we work with the breathing because that's the easiest to learn to control. And then eventually, the follow on is we learn to control the verbal thoughts
Mm.
that are in the mind. And then we begin, as we gain experience, we can actually begin to control the feelings, the way that we actually feel. Now, it is actually possible for people to feel more than one thing at a time. That's what gets things really confusing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anger always is mixed with um, fear.
Fear.
There's no doubt about it. There's no way
Mm.
that anyone will get angry without having some fear mixed in with it. And so one of the ways of defeating an opponent is by getting him angry and then capitalize on the fear. But this is what we would call industrial psychology or propaganda, and that the practices that we're looking at is not how to learn to
I'm sorry.
control other
Your
people.
connection got like a bit dizzy. It cut it off. Yeah. This thing you just did about like capitalizing in your opponent's fear, and we call it ubaganda. I didn't understood.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay? So I'll continue on. Um, Looking around at it, we have to look around. We have to see what's going on with the anxiety. But like I said, we start with learning how to control the feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, control the breath.
Okay.
And then we learn to control the thinking part of the thought process. But one of the things that is kind of interesting to note that when we use the word thought or thinking in English language, that we're really beginning to understand that there's more than one kind of thinking or more than one kind of thought,
Yes.
and that one of the kinds of thoughts that we're working with here is verbal talking inside the mind. But there is other kinds of thinking going on. An example of that would be someone who is doing knitting or cross stitching. They may not be talking to themselves about it, but they're certainly
Yes.
thinking about what they're doing.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So when we're doing things with our hands, another one would be a jeweler who is taking and mounting a diamond on a ring and putting the little
Yes.
fingers into place. He's not talking to himself about that. He may be talking to a student to talk the student through it, but that the actual doing of many things requires a kind of thinking that doesn't require any talking to ourselves at all.
Yes.
An example of that actually is playing music. Playing music does not require us thinking about it. In fact, if we start thinking too much about it, we may
Yeah.
start
Yeah.
screwing up.
Screws it
That's
up. Yeah.
exactly
Yeah.
what happens with kids at a recital, is that they get all confused and everything like that because they're not calming themselves down and getting ready to play. Instead, they're anxious and uptight. So basically, what we're saying is that the top part of the thinking process is actually verbal thought, but there's a lot of stuff that's going on below that too. In that regard, when we say we learn to control the thinking or the thought, that's actually more the verbal thought. And as we gain experience in doing that, we also learn to become able to control the thoughts that are lower down, the
Mm.
sub parts. That in
Mm-hmm.
fact, you could go so far as to understand that a feeling is actually a thought. It just
Mm.
is not a verbal thought. So when you are experiencing anxiety, you know you're experiencing anxiety because you actually are, in fact, thinking about or actually experiencing the anxiety. You're paying attention to it.
Mm.
Okay? So, but being able to control it is a little bit more, is actually part of a training. So the first thing that we learn to do is to control the breathing. Then we learn to control what kind of verbal thoughts we're going to allow. This is where that whole quality of wholesome versus unwholesome thoughts come on. Because, in fact, what we begin to understand is we're actually able to control those deeper kind of thoughts or the feelings. We
Mm.
actually are able to control that with the verbal thoughts that we have.
Mm.
Now, within the Pali, there are two different words that are used for the mind. One is manu, and the other one is chitta. And chit actually is, or sita, is actually more of the whole mind in the sense of all of the thinking process, which means also the feelings. So when we use the word chitta, like Satchitananda or uh, that kind of language, like for instance, Sankara. There is a Chitta Sankara, which actually is the mind, but this is more of the feeling kind. That the Buddha actually talks about it like this in the sense of the Sankara, when the Paticca Samuppada is discussed. The Sankara or the old stuff that comes from the past comes in three ways. One is bodily, the other one is verbal sankara, and the other one is chitta sankara, which actually in the Thai language translation of that sutta, that word is translated, the chitta is translated into jai, which actually is the Thai word for heart, which actually is pointing at that this is means that we have bodily sankara, we have emotional sankara, and we have verbal sankara, and that the verbal sankara and the emotional sankara are very tightly related, but they are different because there are actually two different words that are used in the Pali, and that the higher mind is the frontal cortex in the Pali. This is referred to as manus or manusa, and so we talk about it as the higher mind. Now, um, while we're talking about that, that means that we have three new jobs to do. One is to learn to control the body. The other one is to control the thought process, and we're in the sense of verbal, and also we eventually learn to control the emotional part. And that when we say eventually, that can be quite quickly. It doesn't have to be years from now.
Okay.
But we do take it in that order, in the sense of learning to take a deep breath. And now we're going to start learning to work with the mind that has to do with the verbal quality or the talking to ourselves. And so the Buddha says that we're going to have kind of two kinds of thought: the kind of thought that would be wholesome, and the kind of thoughts that would be unwholesome. The kind of thoughts that are unwholesome would be then the kind of thoughts that we would avoid, but that the wholesome thoughts would be the ones that we would want to encourage. Now, as you're beginning to encourage the mind to have wholesome thoughts, that means that we're beginning to have fewer and fewer unwholesome thoughts, which means that the anxiety will actually naturally go down because we're controlling it in the kind of a secondary way.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is some anxiety that can be, let us say, brought up or kicked into gear from thinking. But it's also possible for the anxiety to kick us off into a kind of thinking process.
Yes.
So they're interrelated. One will cause the other. One of the things that has been known for a long time is that if you can get people upset, they can't think straight. Which means that if we begin to think straight, we can begin to settle ourselves back down.
Yeah.
Many examples of that. I've got many examples of that. One of them is at a very famous chess tournament in 1972. Bobby Fischer, an American, he was a very good chess player, but he
Mm-hmm.
wasn't top quality world class. But he was able to go up against Boris Spassky, and he won because he was playing a lot of psychological tricks. You see, Boris Spassky had been trained in playing chess to just play the chess, and he expected his
Yes.
opponent to just play chess. But Bobby Fischer would get up and he would basically stalk. He would get up
Mm-hmm.
behind him. He would do things. He would chew food with loud smacking noises. He would do a whole
Yeah.
lot of stuff to try to distract Spassky, and it actually worked. And I like to tell that story because it really does show that we can become distracted, and that in fact in university debating teams they have the quality or the idea that you cannot do ad hominem attacks. In other words, your point
Yes.
in this debate is to
Yeah.
talk about the debate and the articles of the debate, not the other guy. You don't
Yeah.
want to attack him because of the position that he's holding. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you do attack him, he'll get frustrated and upset and he'll lose his train of thought.
Yeah.
He can't think straight and generally that's true. When we are attacked, we cannot think straight.
Yeah.
Which means that if we're attacking ourselves on the inside, also then we cannot think straight.
Mm.
And if
Yeah,
we're
that's a
taught,
good twist.
if we are, mhm. And so what we need to do with our meditation practice is intentionally learn to think straight, to practice thinking straight, as opposed to practice thinking about it from an emotional level. So basically, what we could say is the two kinds of thoughts, the wholesome thoughts, are those that are intentionally directed thoughts, and that the unwholesome thoughts are the thoughts that that are directed through emotions and feelings and wants, desires, etc., like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as you begin to monitor your thoughts, begin to watch what you're thinking, we're going to only draw the line of two different kinds of thoughts: wholesome and
Wholesome and
unwholesome
unwholesome.
thoughts. Okay. Now, in Buddhism, there has been the concept of the monkey mind that's been going around for centuries. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a good analogy uh, for students to understand that um, there's a quality of the mind that tends to be moving.
Yes.
Goenka calls this mind the wandering mind. That Sigmund Freud, he called it free
Free
association.
association.
Why?
Yeah.
Because even though I'm associating this thought with the next thought, it really, there's not that much of a connection. It just jumps around from
Yeah.
here to there. All right. So going back to the quality of the monkey mind, that means that the monkey can just jump and jump and jump from one tree to the next, whether the next tree is a wholesome tree or not. So basically, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get that monkey mind to settle down to a smaller area so that he doesn't jump into the unwholesome.
Mm-hmm.
So an example would be that you're okay, we're going to let the monkey jump all over he wants to jump so long as he stays in just one tree. He does not have a whole forest to go to now. We're only
I
going to
see.
let it come into just one tree. And so this is the way that we're going to learn to control or train the mind to be only having wholesome thoughts.
I see.
Okay, so
I
the
see.
wholesome kind of would be the kind of thoughts that have to do with what's going on right now, the here now.
Mm-hmm.
So, in a wholesome thought would be uh, when we wake up and we can see the anxiety directly. We can see it, or in the sense of feeling it as a sensation. Oh, there it is. And I can begin to think about that anxiety directly. But if I am not mindful, if I'm not aware of that anxiety will still, let us say, trigger the monkey to jump all over the place. That in fact, even though most anxiety is subconscious, it's still the boss. Even though we don't know that we have anxiety, still our behavior will be motivated by that anxiety, and so will our thoughts.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. For instance, if we have anxiety, we'll have thoughts of danger, we'll have thoughts of problems, we'll have thoughts of uh, uh, things to do, we'll have
Scarcity.
thoughts of I don't. Yeah, right. I don't want to go there. And in fact, it
Mm-hmm.
can bring on a kind of depression that is actually better to not think at all than to think of the kind of thoughts that the anxiety is trying to give us.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. But another way of doing it is by bringing this anxiety up to full awareness, in the sense that now we're fully conscious of it. It's not the boss anymore. We can
Mm-hmm.
actually see it, and we can choose to do things about it. One of the things that we could choose to do about this anxiety is taking a few deep breaths. Because, in fact, the breathing does help clear out the poisons out of the body.
Yeah.
And so, if we start deep breathing and pay attention to that area where the anxiety is, by breathing into that place and breathing out there, we do not allow that anxiety to take over the mind and start having the kind of thoughts that not only are unwholesome, but they keep the anxiety going.
Yes.
All right. So here's a little story about that. There's an old guy that lives in a hovel. This was many, many thousands and thousands of years ago. And he's sitting in the hovel in his little hut. And he starts to have anxiety. It's at night. He can't get to sleep. He's just he's worried about something, but he can't quite figure out where this anxiety is coming from. So he
Mm-hmm.
starts to think, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And so he comes with the idea, I know what the problem is. I know why I'm feeling so bad. The fence needs to be repaired. Now the goats can get out and the wolves can get in. And so he hops up, he gets out of the hovel, he goes to repair the fence. And he spends maybe an hour or two in the middle of the night fixing the fence. And then he goes back down and he lays down again. And guess what? The anxiety comes back.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it wasn't even that the anxiety came back. It was that while he was repairing the fence, the anxiety was still there, but it was unconscious and he didn't see it. Okay, so in fact, now what we're talking about are three levels of consciousness. The level of consciousness to where it's subconscious, is controlling us, it's giving us thoughts, and then we have the idea of that we can see it, but we still can't do anything about it. And then there's the fully waking up. This is the sati that we're looking for, to be fully awake so that we can see that anxiety and know that we can do something about it. And what we're going to do about it is, number one, start taking some deep breaths. And number two, we're going to make sure that the kind of thoughts that we're having are not driven by this anxiety or this restlessness. So they're going to have thoughts like, oh, I'm glad I see that anxiety. You know, there's no reason to feel anxiety right now. I can settle down. And so we begin to have thoughts, verbal thoughts, that are directed for the anxiety to help it settle down.
Okay. So that
When
would
you
be
do that,
tranquilizing.
pardon?
That would be the tranquilizing of the mind.
Okay, you can use that kind of word. Mm-hmm. You actually are realizing something, but that word realizing has something strange about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that we don't really actually ever realize anything. What we do is we mentalize, or that we understand things. And we'll talk about this at a later time in Paticca
Okay.
Samuppada. But we don't really ever realize anything. What we do, because to realize something means to make it real. So if I realize that tree doesn't mean that the tree is growing out of the top of my head. That what I've done is, when I see the tree and know the tree, that means I mentalized that tree.
Mm.
So I'm just taking on the word realizing right now, because we don't really realize anything. What we do is we mentalize. The question is, how close is our mentalization to the actual reality? Because the closer our mentalization is to the actual reality, then the less suffering there's likely to happen.
Yeah.
That we really do want to see things the way they really are. Okay, and the things that the world is presenting in this outside world as it's coming in through all of the senses and all of that kind of stuff that's coming from the outside, there is no anxiety coming from the outside coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And so any anxiety that comes up was already on the inside. This is an important point to recognize that when we are in the present moment, when we are in reality, there is no need for, in general, any anxiety. That in general, in the reality of the moment is not dangerous. Many things in the past and many things in the future can be dangerous, but right this very moment, it's not dangerous. You're in a situation right now in the room that you're in, there is no reason to feel danger. And yet, this danger is, I use the word danger to point at a very, very low level of fear that is also the source of anxiety. That
Mm-hmm.
underneath all anxiety is a little bit of a fear, and yet the reality is there's nothing to fear. No reason to feel any anxious, uptight, or anything like that. But we do because of our sankara, because that's our pattern or the habit of the mind. So when we're actually able to observe things clearly, then that means that we're observing things without adding any of our own likes and dislikes and wants and feelings with it, so that we get a much better image. Okay, so
Okay.
when we mentalize things or realize something, the more pure it is based upon the actual outside, the better off we'll be, in the sense that we're not making so many mistakes. So what we need to see then is, as we're practicing and waking up, we can begin to say, I can control these feelings by controlling the thoughts. And eventually we'll be able to control the feelings directly. But right now we have two tools that we can use to help work with feelings. One is learning to control the breath, and the other one is learning to control the thoughts. Once we gain skills at doing those things, we're already going in the right direction of learning how to control the feelings.
I see.
But then we're gaining the skills so that we can begin to apply that directly to the feelings, in the sense of taking a deep breath and say, I don't have to feel anxiety right now. I don't have to feel depressed. And as we do that, we can actually say, well, I don't have to, which means I don't really. I can become the champion here. I can, in fact, take over this process and change the outcome so that I don't feel stressed. I don't feel tense. I don't feel uptight. I don't feel anxious. I can feel satisfied. I can feel secure. And so this is the practice that we're working on. And I know a lot of students, they say, when I practice, all of this stuff comes up. Yes, it does. But you can learn to control it through the breathing, and you can learn to control it through directing the thoughts to have only wholesome thoughts
Yeah.
and to stay out of the hindrances. And so, as we're learning to practice Anapanasati, that's one of the main things that we have to do. We can't just sit there and let the mind wander away and call that meditation, even if it feels
Mm-hmm.
like we're going very deep. Long as we're not actually making that division and change between allowing only wholesome thoughts and throwing out and not allowing unwholesome thoughts. So
Mm-hmm.
the Buddha is talking about it from two different methods. One is this quality of wholesome versus unwholesome thoughts. And the other one is by looking at it from the sense of the hindrances and cleaning them out. But it's the same thing. We're just looking at it
Yes.
from two different ways
Yeah.
of looking at it.
Yeah.
Like the Buddha has two different. Okay. So this is the way that we can practice, and we don't need a formal sitting time to do this. That we
Yeah.
can begin to just sit, or
I'm
just any
doing
time that
this
you can
throughout
think
the
of.
day. Yeah.
Anytime you can think of it, you can say, "Hey, I can sit here and feel good. I don't have to feel bad. I don't have to feel uptight or tense.
Yeah.
That I can start to have the kind of thoughts and the kind of breathing that I want, and very soon that can begin to, like 3 or 4 minutes later, you can begin to manage those feelings."
Yeah. Yeah. That makes me think a series of things because like when you were like speaking about these two different ways of like perceiving, uh, one thing that I noticed, it was like there is a perspective of like the observator that like if you look at even if the object is bad, if you can actually perceive it, it turns out to be wholesome, right?
Mm-hmm.
And on the other side around, if you look in the perspective of like the object in itself, uh, the mere fact of it being good actually like sums it up to the quality of like the observer, the good observer, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it like
Yes.
tangles the subject and the object in this way of viewing it. But it poses me another question that comes from like combining these two observations, because like the other day I was like in my sitting session, and I was like perceiving that it's like I was feeling my body very anxious, but my mind actually wasn't even a little bit. I could feel like my heart racing. I could like feel the physiological uh, sensation of being anxious, but not my mind. My mind was like under control, but it was not because I was like trying to make it under control, but because it was like already separated. I don't know when it
Mm-hmm.
began to happen, but it was like there's now a gap, and that actually what makes me think I can actually like tackle this challenge of the antidepressant, like taking it off, because it and like 3 years ago would affect my mind too. The other thing is like I can already like puncture the thoughts and make them vanish, but I cannot like even though I have this capacity, I cannot like manufacture uh, thoughts that I can believe. Even though I can puncture the bad ones, I cannot manufacture like thoughts that I can actually buy into. So the controlling the bad thoughts is it's like a more easy part for me. But like the trusting in the ones I build is like a bit harsh.
It's good. You're beginning to watch what's going on. I like that. You're making good progress. So you keep up with this investigation. You keep watching. You
Okay.
keep noting, and you keep making the decision that I'm only going to allow wholesome thoughts and not allow unwholesome thoughts. Unwholesome thoughts would be like wanting things you don't have, or trying to fix something that's broken, or trying to tell someone off, or any of that kind of stuff. But when we say, wait a minute, things are okay like they are right now, that's how we begin to feel good, is let things be the way that they are.
Mm-hmm.
Now, um, generally, when people think of it like that, there are many teachers talk, talk about it like that. But we have to understand that here we're talking about letting the things be that are on the outside world, that we're not going to just let it be in the sense of anxiety and bad thoughts and hindrances and all of that be. on the inside, that we actually want to clean that stuff up, because letting that stuff be, actually, it doesn't like the outside world.
Mm.
And so there's not going to be, even if we can say let it be, we're not letting it be.
Yeah.
That we actually have to change the way of our thoughts so that we can actually come to a state of being satisfied with the way things are. Because it's really all a
Mm-hmm.
change on the inside, and that change is needed and necessary. And that, to be honest with you, I know many people who, once they start practicing Anapanasati, they don't see much need for the medications anymore.
Mm-hmm.
They begin to examine, they begin to understand the reasons that they took these medications and why they don't need them so much anymore. But it's always a good idea to check back with the doctor who ever gave you that medication,
Yeah, I did
to
it.
tell
I
him
did
that
it before. Yeah.
that you don't need it anymore, or maybe you need a new dosage or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because doctors would really like to hear that finally they're successful. Normally they just give pills and pills and pills and pills, and people don't make much change. So if you can actually tell him, "Hey, I feel much better, and I
Yeah.
don't need your pills anymore," he'll like that.
I bet.
All right, well, you go practice on. You're doing very well. You keep looking, you keep investigating, you keep making
Okay.
sure that only the wholesome thoughts are there.
Okay. Uh, Let me ask you two questions. Just so I can check if my practice is like in the right structure. Because what I am doing is I'm sitting, I'm taking deep breaths, I'm watching everything that's going on. I'm catching if it's a bad thing. If I catch a bad thing, I will like catch it, congratulate myself for doing it, like gathering the mind, and then
Hmm.
I'm like watching the feeling of letting it go, and I'm like rinse and repeat. That's it.
Yes, it's a
Okay.
very simple process. It just needs to be done repeatedly.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Rinse
Okay.
and
Just
repeat,
so I
rinse
can
and
check.
repeat, rinse and
Okay.
repeat.
Okay. Okay. But there is this focus on the realizing part, like the letting go part, is like a important thing, like to watch, like the quality of realizing, or it's not
Hmm.
as important.
The highest quality thoughts you can have are the quality of thoughts that have to do with right here, right now.
Okay.
And possibly the highest of those quality thoughts would be the thoughts that have to do with the third noble truth, the thoughts about being free from suffering. Wow, this is so nice. Oh, I like it. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
this is good stuff. Okay, those are the kind of thoughts that are very high quality thoughts that have to do with what's happening right now in regard to the Four Noble Truths. And the highest one is that third noble truth of being free from suffering. And to know that in this particular moment, there's no anxiety.
Okay. Okay.
And so notice that there's an emptiness to it also, not just to
Yes.
notice it when the anxiety is there, but know when you're free from anxiety also.
Yeah.
Wow, this feels so good.
Yeah. Absolutely.
All right. So I've got another call waiting, and I'll finish this off now. And I'll see you in about a week or so. And you take care and practice well.
Okay. You
You're
too.
making good progress. I'm glad to
Thank
hear
you
it.
so much. Thank you.
All righty.
Bye
We'll see
bye.
you later, Arthur. Bye bye.
We'll see you.